Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Williams. I'm Assistant Director at the Stanford U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, and we wanted to welcome you, myself, and on behalf of Dr. Richard Dasher. We are really honored to be part of this event today with the Keizai Society of Silicon Valley, and we're really glad that we can partner together to bring you this program that they've put together to commemorate, obviously, this really important anniversary. And with that, I want to go ahead and turn the program over to May, because we have such great guest speakers and I don't want to take up any more of your time. So thank you again for including us.
Yes, thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, very well said. So, and we have really good speakers today. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to Tohoku Earthquake and Tsunami 10-year Anniversary Commemoration. My name is Mei Kao. I'm the VP of Operations for Keizai Silicon Valley. I believe this is the first time we held an event at noon. So, thank you very much for taking the time to join us in remembering 3/11. So today's agenda includes presentations from our speakers, and we have a minute of silence observation and followed by a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So please put in your questions in the Q&A box and the chat box, and we won't answer anything until the very end. So before today's commemoration, Keizai had organized a few other events in response to the disaster. To talk briefly about the activities we did, I'm going to hand over to Chimi Shioya. Chimi, our Keizai president, and she will take it from here.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, hi. Good afternoon. I guess this is the first time, as May mentioned, that we are doing this in the afternoon. So we really appreciate you taking your busy time out of your busy time to join this important session. I'm Chimi Shioya, Keizai Silicon Valley president. And the song that we are playing at the beginning in the background, titled Hanawasaku, was made as a theme song for recovery of Tohoku. And many of you know this song. In fact, the Keizai team did the dry run a few days ago to play this song. And I cannot stop singing this song in my head. So if you hear some humming in the background during this session, it's probably me singing. So you know who and why. Now, I want to share my screen. Do you see the screen? Do you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so 10 years ago, March 11, 2:46 p.m. Many of us will never forget this day. I was in a business meeting in a high-rise building in Tokyo. And I remember vividly thinking this could be my last moment. When the building started to make noise, squeaking noise, and swayed so hard and long time, and that's when I thought this could be my last moment. So this is very personal to me. But at the same time, as a Keizai, we wanted to do something. And that's what we did, some fundraising activities. And donated some money to the people who were in need. Actually, I forgot to mention this next slide, that on that evening, I was one of those 600,000 people. It's called Kitaku Konnansha, those people who could not go back home that day. By the time I reached my hotel, it was after midnight. So you know how things went in Tokyo. You saw these horrible pictures through your TVs and news, I'm sure. So as I said again, it was very personal to me, but as a Keizai, we wanted to see what we could do to help. So on March 17, we actually had a regular forum event scheduled, but we quickly turned into a venue for people to come together to talk about what they felt, emotions, and also what we could do together. So in the end, we did multiple events, but the total sum of the funds we raised was approximately $250,000. And we donated these funds primarily to orphans of March 11 and some food bank who could not even get the help because they are evacuating on the second floor of their own homes. It was those people are sometimes forgotten because they are not in the evacuation center or shelters, but they are evacuating at their home. So we provided the food for those people. Now, as you can see, we did a lot of things. May 3rd, we did fundraising, dinner networking, primarily with Google folks and the owner of Pampers. We raised $100,000 in one evening. So that was one of the highlights of these activities that we did. May 24th, we discussed the nuclear energy and how economically this would impact Japan. And we had a very notable speakers at the point, Dr. Barton Roshna is, I believe he was a Nobel Prize recipient as well. In many of the things we did, I think we are most proud of was different organizations got together, Keizai Silicon Valley, SBC Wireless, Thai Silicon Valley, and supported by Consulate General of Japan. We put together about 2-hour program and followed by silent auctions. And even the local multiple corporations joined us to provide the items for silent auctions. Lastly, in August 2011, we felt that since we have raised, people trusted Keizai Silicon Valley to donate. Therefore, we felt that we need to go see the people in the disaster area. So we made a visit to Ishinomaki, Onagawa, Oka Elementary School. About 30 first and second graders died because of the tsunami and along with teachers. And some of the shelters that they were living now in a very small space. So it was wonderful to see, not wonderful, but given the situation, we were able to see actually with our own eyes what people are going through. So it was very good activity to be responsible for the money that we raised. Lastly, I want to mention that through these activities, different people from different backgrounds, different organizations, different corporations came together as one to help Tohoku. So it was a great moment out of the tragedy that we formed relationships and connections. So we hope this will still continue beyond 10 years. And that is my last message. So May, the mic is yours now.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jimmy. So this is, well, we're going to observe a minute of silence. Now let's take a moment to remember those who perished, those who lost their loved ones, their livelihood, their earthly possessions, and lived through probably one of the most devastating destructions in history. So please join us to observe a minute of silence. Okay, welcome back. Next, we're going to introduce our first speaker, John Kagyuki. So John spent almost 3 decades in Japan working as general counsel before moving back to the Bay Area. He has received recognition in both Japan and the US for his contributions to the law profession, the judicial system, and his efforts to promote and advance free trade. John spent 4 months helping with the recovery effort in Soma, a town close to Fukushima. He received an award from the US Army for his humanitarian service, from the California National Guard, a Medal of Merit for exceptional service. So just a reminder before I hand the mic to John, no questions will be answered until the end of the presentations. Please make use of the Q&A box and we will address the questions to all the speakers later. So now let's listen to John's story. There you go, John.
Yes, thank you. My name's John Kakinuki. I'll briefly, thank you for the introduction, and I'll briefly give a little more background. I'm half Japanese, but when I was young, my American father died, and I went back to Japan to finish my education. And so I lived and studied and worked there for over 30 years, half my life. I was working on March 11th for a company called AXA Life Insurance Japan, which originally was called Nippon Dantai Seimei Hoken. And I was supposed to return to the United States on April 1st, 2011. But when the earthquake hit, I asked the management of AXA, both in the United States and in Paris and in Japan, to allow me to stay for a few more months. And so I stayed there till July 1st. And I'm going to share some slides, and then I'll return to my picture to describe a few more things to you. So this picture on the right is the map of the Tohoku region that was hit by the earthquake. And you'll see right at the center, the 20-kilometer zone is where Fukushima Daiichi is located. People within the 20-kilometer zone were evacuated, people from 20 to 30 kilometers were ordered to stay within their homes. And the 20 to 30 kilometer zone that I'm circling right now is the area where we did most of our work. And I'll return to my video. AXA had a strong, very strong ties to Fukushima, because when the company was Nichidan Seimei, its headquarters were in Fukushima, and our largest customer base was in that prefecture, and one of our largest sales offices was the Soso sales office, Soso meaning Soma and Futaba. So this area that I showed you on the map was historically, not presently, but historically, one of the key centers for the business. So we felt a strong obligation to do what we could to help people there. I'm going to tell you a few stories. The first one is about the FSA, or Financial Services Agency. Several city halls had their paper and computer records destroyed during the disaster. It was impossible for them to issue birth or death certificates. My CEO, who is a French-speaking Belgian, came and asked me how we could help. And I suggested that we send teams of sales and compliance people to visit various evacuation centers and ask if any family members had been missing since the disaster. If they hadn't been found for a couple of weeks, we would consider them to have perished, and if they weren't in hospitals or otherwise. And this was a violation of the FSA regulations. You need a death certificate to pay insurance money. But this was a very special circumstance, and I explained to my boss that I considered it fukakoryoku, or force majeure. So we sent teams with PCs and satellite phones and cash boxes to the various evacuation centers, and we made initial payments on the spot. And then we received details from people who would say, father was out fishing, or mother was coming home from work, and then they disappeared. So we would pay them the rest of their insurance payments as soon as we could after that, but we would give them cash disbursements on the spot in the evacuation centers. Then my CEO and I received a call we were worried about from the head of the insurance bureau of the FSA. In these sort of meetings, there are usually, with someone that senior, there will be two note takers who are also pretty senior people. And my boss and I knew them both. They were people who like to give us trouble about all kinds of things. The head of the insurance bureau asked us what we were doing, and I explained that we were finding survivors in evacuation centers and making payments. The two note takers gave me an angry look. Then their boss slapped his knee, and the two note takers looked at each other like, say, he's going to get mad at them. But what their boss said made them open their mouths. He said, "Subarashi, hoka no seihou gaisha ni sono you ni taio suru shidou o dashimashou." That's wonderful. I'm going to recommend that all other life insurance companies handle the payment of proceeds in the same way. And I'll move on to the next story. Our head office in Paris was shipping large containers of potassium iodide, dosimeters, Geiger counters, and protective clothing. That's Yokakarium, Sendyoke, Geiger counter, Bogofuku. They were sending large shipments of those every few days. And at first, a nurse would accompany them from Paris, and then they'd drop them off at the airport. We'd pick them up, and they'd return the next day on the next flight to Paris. But after a few shipments, we would just have the Pelican boxes put on the plane, brought over, and my staff and I would drive to Narita with a truck that had a sticker, Tokubetsu Kyoka, that we'd received from the National Police Agency, over roads to Narita from Tokyo that were closed to ordinary traffic. We would then enter customs from a side door, and the customs people got to know us well and were very cooperative. But then one Friday when I went to Narita, one of the customs people who knew us well called me into a side room and said, "The Minister of Health, Labor and Welfare will not let you import these things anymore without an ordinary import license." I told him, "We are not importers. We don't resell these things. We're doing it for humanitarian reasons." And he said, "I understand. I'm very sorry, but we are customs and MHLW has jurisdiction over this." So I had one of my colleagues drive the truck back to Tokyo while I was calling on the phone. I called my boss, and since AXA was a French company, he called the EU ambassador and the French ambassador at their homes. I also called the American deputy chief of mission at his home. I was a vice president of the American Chamber of Commerce, so I had his personal phone number. The next morning, which was a Saturday, I received a call on my cell phone from a senior customs official. He was the person in charge of importation of medical devices. He said, "Kakinuki-san, お宅の荷物が成田の保税倉庫にあります。場所を取っているから早く取りに来てもらえませんか?" Mr. Kakinuki, one of your packages is taking up space in our bonded warehouse. It's in the way, so could you hurry up and come pick it up? So I don't know if it was the EU ambassador, the French ambassador, or the American deputy chief of mission, or all of them who persuaded the Minister of Health, Labor and Welfare to change his mind, but somebody did. So it was a Saturday. I drove to our office. I had security let me in to get the company truck and drove to the bonded warehouse at Narita to pick up that delivery of relief supplies. Of course, we wouldn't just receive these shipments. My colleagues, my staff, actually, the ones I was sending to evacuation centers to look for the missing father or the missing mother or whomever, they would also drive our truck up with deliveries of these supplies. And we'd also supplement it with food, water, blankets, and flashlights. They'd bring them to a prefectural office in Fukushima City, and then the prefecture would distribute them to Soma City, Namie, Futaba, and Okuma, the cities that were hardest hit by the nuclear disaster. But at one point, the Kencho, the prefectural office, asked if we could personally go and explain how to use the potassium iodide and dosimeters because they didn't have any experts. I had some training in that from the military. And so after the customs incident, I accompanied my staff on a trip to Fukushima to deliver these supplies. I'll now share my screen again to describe what happened. So after arriving at Fukushima City, we spent one night in a hotel there. Then we drove from Fukushima City to Soma City. Here's the upper left is the entrance to Soma City. Actually, it's Soma Port, which is the area that was destroyed the most by the tsunami in that part of Fukushima. And so on the upper right, I'm explaining how to use a dosimeter to an official of, I don't think he's from the Soma Shiakusho himself. I think he's from the Shoko Kaigisho, the Chamber of Commerce, because the Soma City government didn't have enough resources to handle a lot of this. So they were having people from the Chamber of Commerce assist them. And you'll see the dosimeter in my hand and the boxes of potassium iodide on the table. I'm also wearing my uniform, but since I was not officially there on official duty, I removed the US Army and other insignia from my uniform and instead put on an AXA sticker on my left chest. After I delivered these supplies to the gentleman from Soma City, he then took me on a ride in his car. And you'll see on the lower left, a couple of huge trucks that were brought by the tsunami off the road into the side, into this mountain. And then he showed me something that I'll never forget. These were all homes. They were all destroyed by the tsunami. Then we were following a caravan of Japanese self-defense force vehicles, and he was taking me further to show me other things. Here on the bottom left is a bus in the water. And then just a little bit drive further, there's a fishing ship, a very large one, on land. The tsunami mixed everything up. And then he brought me to the fishing cooperative or fishing union. And at first, it didn't look particularly unusual until he took me to the side, and I saw that the tsunami had destroyed everything inside. The whole building was destroyed, and then he took me to the back, and there was a fishing boat jammed into the second story of this building. So after that, he brought me back to the Soma City Hall and to an office that was run by the Chamber of Commerce, where people were assembling to help volunteer. After seeing this, I knew why he took me on that tour. He never said it, he didn't have to. I knew I had to help. So at that time I was teaching the AXA Karate Club, and I made jackets for them all. When I went back to Tokyo, I asked, does anyone want to, I'm not teaching karate right now because of the disaster. Does anyone want to come and help? I'm going back up to Soma on the weekends. And so this is just a few of the people, but a number of people from the karate club volunteered to help. So I made them all AXA Karate Club jackets so that they could wear to distinguish them while we were out there volunteering. We were doing things like going into people's homes and removing mud-soaked tatami and bringing them out to an area where they could be replaced with clean tatami so that people could resume. They were ordered to stay at home, but how do you sleep on mud-soaked tatami and mud-soaked futon? So we are bringing the things that could not be washed and reused out into this area to dump. We're also helping people recover items. This tansu on the lower left was very important to this family. It had all their photo albums and so forth in it. And this man was not from AXA. He was just a random volunteer who actually came from where I have relatives from Kobe. And he had volunteered years before, after the Hanshin earthquake. And I also had relatives who had suffered after the Hanshin earthquake. So he also joined my team. And since he was stronger than some of the salespeople who were in my karate team, he helped me lift this up, and we helped the family clean out their photo albums and so forth. Behind this particular house, you'll see on the lower right, Tsuko Dome, the signs that say do not enter. This is that 20-kilometer zone, the area where the radiation was very strong. And if we looked over it, we could see dead livestock inside there who had been killed either by the tsunami or by radiation. But our later speaker, Mr. Bump, will talk about working inside that area. We were outside of the area in the 20 to 30 kilometer zone. One of the interesting stories we had was this home on the left, on the up, this car was not their car. It was a random car that the tsunami had brought over their roof and dropped in their backyard. So after we helped them clean out their mud-soaked tatami and clean up other things in their home, we cleaned up the ground, and some of these gentlemen in the lower right, we tied a rope through the windows of this car and pulled it to the front of the house so it could then be removed. Otherwise, it would have stayed in their backyard forever. The next slide. After hearing that I was bringing my students from our karate club to Fukushima, my subordinates in the legal and compliance department said, "Boss, why are you only bringing them? Bring us too. And the company also heard that I'd made these jackets. And so Paris made a bunch of jackets and sent them for other people. And these are the orange jackets that people who weren't in my karate club, but worked either in legal and compliance or in other departments in the company, wore. And we also had stock for people from the European Business Council and the American Chamber of Commerce. So various random people would come and join our teams to help us volunteer. They were not only people from AXA, but people from various foreign business organizations. And also the City Hall teamed people who I'd never met before and would never see again, except some people I exchange email with, who had come to volunteer out of the goodness of their hearts. They had them join our teams. And so that concludes my pictures. And this concludes my part of the presentation. Thank you.
So thank you, John, for your stories. And if there are any questions from the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A box and we will ask John later. So actually, before we move on to Scott, I will say a few words about Carolyn Pulver, our original speaker. So regrettably, due to health reasons, Caroline Pulver won't be able to join us today. And I want to especially apologize to those who sign up for this event because you are her friends, and then and those that are calling in from the UK. So unfortunately, she won't be here today. So Carolyn is a British entrepreneur who lived in Tokyo for 15 years prior to the disaster. When it happened, actually, she was vacationing in Palau and had to be evacuated due to a tsunami warning there. Not sure if it's due to her own brush with tsunami or the ubiquitous coverages of the disaster, she has taken upon herself to help out her adopted country. Caroline decided the best way to help is to first go back to England, her home country, to start raising awareness, giving talks at all the schools, collecting donations before heading back to Japan and hand deliver them. She didn't want the donations to go to the big cities where lots of efforts have been made. Instead, she took time to identify a neglected area, the Oshika Peninsula, one of the closest areas to the quake center. So you see, it's like, let's see, the mirror image is, okay, it's right here. So that's the Oshika Peninsula. And she dedicated a lot of her times to clean up and rebuild that remote village. So Carolyn is basically a one-woman band, not part of any big rescue organizations, any company, any government agency. She just wants to get this done, and she's very resourceful and tenacious. So she ended up raising just short of $250,000, all through grassroots operations, since there's no administration overhead, all the money goes directly to the people of Oshika. She also managed around 30 different projects there to help them rebuild. I read her book, 1 Month in Tohoku, an English woman's memoir on life after the tsunami. Her involvement is not really for just a month, like the title. It's really a month or two every year in the last 10 years. The book is full of uplifting and heartwarming anecdotes. She shows us that you can still find love and laughter in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Caroline, through her volunteering spirits, restores faith in humanity during those difficult times. It's really quite a pity that she won't be here to tell her own stories, and we wish her a very speedy recovery. So, and thank you, Scott, for filling in very, very last minute. This all happened yesterday. So we're really grateful that you can just fill in. So Scott studied and lived in Japan for 4 years prior to the Fukushima nuclear disaster. For his Asia focus, aside from his time in Japan, he also has 4 years of business leadership experience in China. Scott's professional training in risk management and his having radiological operation experiences made him a perfect candidate to help at the Fukushima nuclear site. So once again, please leave your questions in the Q&A box, and I'm gonna hand it over to Scott. So there you go, Scott.
Wonderful. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And first off, thank you very much, May. I'm Scott Bump, and I'm glad to be speaking with Keizai Silicon Valley today. I'll speak a little bit about the experience of a first responder team to the Fukushima Daiichi plant after the disaster. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All righty. And I am not, oh, here we go. Okay, so 3 points that I want to make in today's discussion. First, few things are more important than standing shoulder to shoulder with friends in a crisis. Second, sometimes our burden is to face down an epic challenge while accepting the enormity of the tasks and risks. Third, even when facing great challenge, remain optimistic about overcoming that challenge in the end. Before we get into the substance of my talk, let me tell you a little bit about myself and focus on some relevant items from my background. My career started with 6 years in the US Naval Nuclear Power Program, where I qualified and operated 3 different nuclear plants. I spent 2 years of university studies in Japan while I was working on my BA in Japanese. I spent 1 year as a shift supervisor on a major retrofit at the Fukushima Daiichi Unit 2 plant. And I also have 2 years leading a GE research and development facility that performs analysis on failed nuclear fuel. We're all familiar with the earthquake and tsunami. The graphics on the left indicate the epicenter, plant locations, and height of the tsunami along Japan's east coast. With the images on the right, I want to highlight the max elevation of the wave at the Fukushima Daiichi site. At that location, the wave was approximately 15 meters above sea level and flooded emergency power generator rooms at 5 of the 6 reactors. Approximately 24 hours later, Unit 1 suffered the first of 3 hydrogen explosions. This was the result of the loss of offsite power, loss of emergency power, the resultant loss of cooling, and eventual melting of the core. In the days following the nuclear disaster, a small team came together to assist in monitoring the radiological consequences at the site. We had 3 drone pilots from the Honeywell Corporation, had a Westinghouse radiological safety engineer, and me. Brad, Lindsay, and Jeffrey, and Dan all volunteered, having no prior connection with Japan, other than each had a critical skill and wanted to help however they could. The 5 of us together are in the center photo. The upper right photo was us prior to departing from Tokyo to Fukushima on the 27th of March. On one of the last days of March, we were set up and ready for our initial drone flights. We had spent a long day of preparations the day previous. We were all dealing with jet lag, and on this only occasion, we had trouble getting the drones to communicate. Frustrated, we canceled the operation after 20 minutes of failed attempts to get the communications equipment to work. Because of the risk of UHF communications interference, when we were flying drones, the Japan Self-Defense Force would not fly in the area. Less than 60 seconds after I notified TEPCO that we had canceled the day's efforts, a Japan Self-Defense Force fighter did a flyover to obtain heat and radiation readings above the plants. Please consider for a moment the level of coordination that was necessary for that to happen. Even with and facing the situation and overwhelming challenges of that period, the coordination was absolutely remarkable. If you take a look at the center photograph, that's Lindsay Ballard getting ready to set up the T-Hawk prior to flying that day's mission. And then on the bottom right photograph, that's looking at Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4 from the south. And you can see the T-Hawk highlighted in red as we were attempting to look inside the reactor building and identify whether there was still fuel available to be cooling the fuel rods that were in the spent fuel pool. During the weeks and months of our operations, we worked together, we ate together, we slept together. We were able to spend the majority of that time bonding. We also dealt with the pain and stress that was all around us. For everyone on the US team, it was their first time to Japan, everybody except for me. Nevertheless, I did my best to help each person experience some small bit of the substance of Japanese culture. The top left image is at the Fukushima Daiichi site fire station, which served as our forward operating base when we were operating on site. The image on the right is of the pilots operating with a 2.5 or operating in a 2.5 centimeter thick shield box, steel shield box that was used to minimize pilot radiation exposure when we were operating within 100 meters of the plant. Even in times of high stress, it's important to enjoy even a limited amount of humor. Unique foods, interesting packaging, and even beer vending machines became a source of wonder, cultural exposure, and an occasional laugh. Let me provide some closing points about the site today and their current status. 3 of the 6 plants on site had core meltdowns. An additional plant suffered a hydrogen explosion. The plants today are all now stable, but thousands of tons of wastewater are being collected on the site. There are tentative plans to begin initial limited removal of fuel remnants from the melted core at Unit 2. That's supposed to start this year. And rough estimates are that complete recovery will require another 20 or 30 years. In closing, in March of 2011, Japan experienced a series of crippling back-to-back disasters. The country stood resilient, and close friends stood by your side in support. Together, we faced almost insurmountable unknowns, ambiguity, and volatility. While many challenges remain, the progress to date should give us reason to be optimistic about the future. And with that, I thank you all for your attention. May?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your presentation. So we are going to begin the Q&A session. And so it's not just questions that you want to ask the speakers. You can also welcome to put in like comments or your own experience, and if you want to share with the audience. So you can please type that in and we'll get to them one by one. So I just want to jumpstart on something. So Scott, so do you have any unique observations while leading the response team that you want to share with us?
Yes, thank you, May. Over the weeks and months that I had an opportunity to directly observe the pilots performing the various missions and operations, doing visual and radiological surveillance on site. It was actually quite interesting to observe the male pilots when receiving information either from our Japan team, from myself, or from a assistant pilot that helped them manage the data and communications of the devices. When they were flying a mission and additional information came in, they typically had to stop flying the drone. So they would effectively park the drone at a waypoint, which meant that it would just stand still wherever they were in the mission, collect the input that was coming to them, integrate that into their plan, and resume operations. It was absolutely remarkable to me to watch Lindsay Ballard, who for our first 3 weeks in the program was the only female that was involved in our response. When the same type of additional information was being communicated to her, she was able to continue flight operations and weave that information into her activities in a way that the male pilots were unable to. So for whatever it's worth, that one data point was a striking example of a woman's, at least Lindsay's, ability to multitask and continue progressing through an evolution while taking additional input in. So I thought that was remarkable. So that was interesting. Thank
Wow.
you.
Yeah, I like that. I like that too. So, well, March 8th was the International Women's Day. So we know how to multitask, definitely, like juggling careers and cooking food and raising our kids and everything, right? So yes, we are used to that. So John, do you have any of those stories? Like, how do you see the male and female side of your volunteers? Did you have any observations?
I think you saw in the photos that our teams from Tokyo were about 1/3 female, and most, but not all of them, were from my karate club. But a few of them were, for example, the CEO's personal interpreter came and joined us as well. But it was very manual work we were doing. So they generally worked in different areas. And I saw one of the questions was about photos. So I'll respond to that. They would work at the city hall sorting food and blankets and things like that to distribute to people, as well as cleaning the photos. We'd wipe the mud off and make sure that the photos were good enough so that we could give it to someone to take care of. But and I'm not saying this as sexist. It was very manual labor. The women couldn't have picked up these fallen over tansu that we were picking up, and some of them did work on our teams, but most of them stayed at the city hall and did other things that were equally important. They were the ones who were distributing the medical supplies and so forth, and then cleaning up the photos and making sure that they itemized them. This came from this house, that came from that house. And someone would say, "Oh, uchino janai. It's not our photo album. It just floated into our house." And so they'd sort that it had come there from somewhere else. And then we'd leave it up to the local government to figure out what to do with them.
So great. So there's another question from John from Larry Greenwood. So could you talk about how important it was to you, to your policyholders, beneficiaries, to get those rapid payments from AXA? My understanding was that this was the first financial assistance received by these families long before any help from the government.
Yes, that's an unfortunate truth. And that's part of the reason why my CEO called me into his office and said, "What can we do for these people?" Because we were hearing from our offices on the ground. One of our largest sales offices was in Soma City. And they told us, everyone needs the money, but it's against the FSA regulations. What do we do? And so that's why I developed this theory of force majeure, which is true. It was force majeure. It's an act of God. And we started giving out the money as soon as we could. It's an unfortunate truth of governments anywhere in the world, ours in the United States also. When you need to deal with an emergency and relief packages, often it becomes politicized. So the same thing happened in Japan in the prefectural and the national governments. Relief packages were not necessarily passed as quickly as they could have been. But I think the government did its best to catch up.
Okay, having heard you said that, I kind of remember what Carolyn said in her book and about like how she deal with all the donations she received and to hand it out. And I have no idea how she can handle it because she doesn't know any officials and stuff, but she manages to distribute all her donations. I just want to comment on that. So Scott, why is it, so this is from Eric Sadleck. Why is it so difficult to isolate the isotopes in the wastewater so that the water can be disposed of?
Yeah, I love the easy questions. So thank you, Eric. So I'm not a chemist, but let me do my best to explain with hopefully a straightforward analogy. The primary isotopes of concern are cesium-134 and cesium-137. There may be some others, but they're particularly nasty from a radiological perspective, and as or more important than their toxicity, they're water soluble. So if we use a very basic comparison, if we put salt in water, the salt dissolves, and it effectively becomes a homogeneous mixture of salt mixed up with the water molecules. Whereas if we put pepper in water, under most circumstances, that pepper's not going to dissolve, and you can still see the little black and brown and gray specks of pepper in any kind of solution that you mixed it in. The cesium is very similar to the salt, and there are membranes and technologies that can filter that cesium out, but at a very slow rate. And so it's an extremely complicated process. So without trying to take it any further than that simple analogy, I think the biggest issue is the cesium. I think the solubility of the cesium compounds the challenge of filtering just immense volumes of water that are being poured onto the plants to keep the fuel cool, and then are leaking in various piping and structural openings, and to some limited degree still flowing into the ocean. But they're doing a better job of collecting it. But any of us, if you take a look at Google Maps, you can see a top-down view of the site, and there are hundreds of thousands of large water storage containers there, and the volume continues to increase. So hopefully I briefly gave us an idea of why that's hard.
Right. Thank you, Scott. So next question, this is from Ayumi. So how are the handling, rescue, preparation, analysis, etc. updated after your experiences of this disaster at your organizations? I guess she meant, how does it affect you? Like with all these experiences that you have. I guess this can be addressed to both speakers. John, you want to go first?
Sure. AXA Life, being a business in the insurance industry, already had a lot of contingency plans. I originally, after 22 years at a law firm, Baker & McKenzie, I worked in the same company as Scott, GE, but in a different business. But businesses in that area have all kind of contingency plans. And when I moved to AXA in 2009 was the same time as the H1N1 pandemic, which now seems minor compared to coronavirus. but we had stockpiles of Tamiflu and a plan to inoculate people if it spread within the company. We were checking people's temperatures every day, just like people are doing now, but from the beginning of when I began working there in April 2009. We didn't have specifically a nuclear reaction plan, but we had various other plans for other disasters, including for earthquakes and tsunamis. And since I had the most background, both being trained in the military and having studied a lot of chemistry while I was at university, the CEO appointed me the nuclear disaster officer. And so I had to do a lot of very quick studying. But I mentioned my stay at AXA Japan was extended by 3 months. For 3 months, I wasn't doing my regular legal and compliance job anymore. I was full-time handling the disaster. And an organization like that is prepared to quickly move someone into that.
And Scott, you want to add to that? How did you?
Yeah, and I'll look at this from the perspective of lessons learned, and will echo some of John's comments. The big original equipment nuclear manufacturers, Siemens, Hitachi, Toshiba, GE, Westinghouse in the United States, over years have accumulated a lot of lessons learned. So in our case, from a safety perspective, the radiological controls, other industrial safety measures that needed to be put into place, all of that was available. Really, the only challenge, not the only challenge, but one of my early concerns before mobilizing to Japan was recognizing that radiation monitoring equipment was at a premium. And so I, we might say, legally stole some equipment from some US custom appropriations might be the appropriate term, knowing so that the folks that were lending the equipment knew it wouldn't come back because it was going to get contaminated, but they were also willing to donate it because of the need to help Japan. Probably the most significant lessons learned were relative to working in a hazardous environment and operating drones. Before we left, we were partnering with some academics that had significant experience using drones in non-radiological but natural disaster environments. And we partnered significantly with them, and even put together a number of reports and presentations that were used to help the broader drone industry understand and learn from the lessons that we learned while we were out at site.
Okay, so actually, I just want to squeeze in one last question. How did this is from Mariana Grossman, how did your bicultural knowledge help you serve in this disaster? So I guess, John, you want to go first? And we have to make it brief because it's already past our time. So.
Yes, we have something in the National Guard called Civilian Military Liaison, or Military Civilian Liaison, which goes left and which goes right, depends on who you're talking to. But I'd already been trained in that, but also we needed to deal with the Jieitai, who were not English speakers, and we needed to coordinate with them. So I was amazed that the local authorities in Soma City gave me so much trust from day one to discuss with the ground self-defense forces. Okay, you're going to take those big things over there. We civilians will take these smaller things over here. And so you saw these Jeeps and Humvees and so forth. We actually were in communication with those people to coordinate how to do it. And we allocated, of course, they took the larger structures, the government buildings, the schools and so forth, and we took people's homes.
And Scott?
Yeah, just real briefly, my time and studies in Japan, most importantly, helped me with my ability to speak the language and bridge the necessary communications between our team and the Toshiba and TEPCO support that we had on site. So I thought that was probably the most significant way that my experience in Japan previously helped while I was there for the disaster response.
Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. You'll see that the City Hall had assigned various Japanese volunteers to work on my teams. They didn't care that I had a US passport. I spoke Japanese well enough to be able to lead a team, and they assigned them to us.
Okay, great. So we are absolutely running out of time. So this concludes our commemoration today. And I just want a parting word is that what I learned from this is tragedies are unavoidable, but remembering the people's resilience will add hope. So let's just be more hopeful. And this actually really applied to the pandemic as well. So I guess we just have to stay hopeful. And there's another event tomorrow by the San Jose Museum of Japanese Art. I'm just going to share this with you. As our parting words. So thank you everyone for joining, and see if you can attend this event tomorrow evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.